We have a presentation from Peter Haag, which is the Chief of Traffic Engineering for DELDOT. He was invited by Councilwoman Durham. Ms. Durham, would you like to make an introduction?
Sure, thank you. And hopefully, I think he is over in attendees right now. If he could be brought over, I just wanted to welcome him and thank him for being here today. I actually used to work in Pennsylvania as an advocate and doing educational program and policy work around roundabouts. But I guess, so I've been in touch with DELDOT over the years, but Peter and I were both at a conference about a year ago, the Bike Delaware conference, where roundabouts were featured. And I just often think about development plans that come before us, and I think there are sometimes some opportunities where they could be used more through our development projects. And so I just thought it would be great if he could come and share the benefits of them, because they're often misunderstood, and answer any questions that folks have, and just kind of walk through the pros and cons of roundabouts, and maybe we can all just keep an eye out for opportunities to use them in the future. So Peter, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Mr. Haag, just prior to speaking, just if you state your name for the record, we would appreciate it. And are you going to be screen sharing?
Yes, so appreciate the opportunity to come. So my name is Peter Haag. I'm DELDOT's Chief of Traffic Engineering. Give me 1 second and I will. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right. So again, my name is Peter Haag, DELDOT's Chief of Traffic Engineering. I'm here to talk to you about just roundabouts in general. Talk kind of the high level, and then I'll get into some variations with regards to just the topic at hand. So with every presentation that we do at the department, we start off with our mission and vision. So excellence in transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, every one. The next two slides, this one and the next one, we also like to highlight our fatal crashes. Unfortunately, it's not a good statistic that we have out there, but it gives you an idea of what's happening on our roadways. So last year we had 165 fatalities statewide. That is one of the highest numbers in several decades that we've had. And you could see from just a typical documentation and a resource standpoint what we capture with all of the statistics with regard to a fatal crash. With this information, you'll see kind of the breakdown based on the county, and just seeing how Newcastle County, based on last year's fatals, accounted for about 50% of those fatalities. This year, as of June 12th, which unfortunately is already out of date, as of last week, we had 66 fatalities, but as of this morning, we had 70 fatalities on our roadways in 2023. And again, it's capturing information. It shows kind of the ups and downs with regards to the various categories and the crash types and the person that's involved, to see where our crash trends are happening year to date based on previous years. So kind of diving into the topic at hand with regards to roundabouts. So a roundabout is a form of intersection control. It's similar to another type of intersection control, or two that are common, are traffic signals and all-way stops, and then also two-way stops. But with a roundabout, it's a circular counterclockwise flow. It accommodates all users. So when you think of not just vehicles, but bikes and pedestrians, so those vulnerable user topics or categories, they accommodate those users. There's no parking, and I bring that up because of some other slides that you'll see as to why it's not considered a roundabout. the entry point into the roundabout is all yield controlled. There's no stop signs. There's typically no signals. It's yield controlled to those that are in the roundabout are receiving the yielding from those that are trying to access. It's a low speed, so typically 25 miles an hour or less. When you think of severity of crashes or just the crash type, it helps from a severity of an influence. It also, from a calming standpoint, it can be used for like gateway designs into various communities or residential areas. So I mentioned about the no parking. So this is not a roundabout. It just kind of shows there's a lot of things going on, even though that there's multi-lane scenarios within the circular area. Some of the ones locally that are considered a roundabout, this one is up on Weldon Road. It was a part of the Blue Ball project. It was constructed several years ago. It's about 120-foot diameter. It accommodates both the peds, the bikes, the vehicles in the area. Another one is right outside of Troop 2 in Bear, in the Glasgow area off of Route 40. There's, besides the state police facility, there's also the YMCA facility. So other users that are traveling to and from in the area. This one is about 130 foot in diameter. Our multi-lane roundabout statewide is the one in Rehoboth, right as you're entering Rehoboth on Delaware Route 1A or Rehoboth Avenue. The diameter is about 170 foot, but again, you could see the various usage with the PEDs at the area. There was also bike connections that were provided recently to the south or western part of the roundabout. So the intersection control in Georgetown, right there in the center of Georgetown, is not considered a roundabout because again, the parking aspects and the conflict points that exist at the circle or circular intersection deems it not to be a roundabout, even though it has similar characteristics with the various usage, the counterclockwise flow, the yielding condition, but because of the conflict points within the area, is not considered a roundabout. One of our smaller roundabouts, it's actually considered a mini, and it's on Mifflin Road in Dover. The diameter is about 45 foot. You could see that one of some of the bigger differences between this and the other ones that I showed is the footprint of the area being one of the prime ones, but also how the inner circle configuration is designed, where the majority of it, if not all of it, is mountable, so a vehicle can drive over it. There are signs in the center island. I have another example that provides no signs in the center island, so that emergency vehicles, school buses, and just larger trucks and other vehicles can accommodate the various turns by just traveling over a portion of that center island. So why a roundabout? So from a Delaware standpoint, intersections is our number one primary emphasis area in our strategic highway safety plan. And our strategic highway safety plan is a collaborative effort between three prime agencies. It's DELDOT, Office Highway Safety, and then the Delaware State Police that make up the core committee that establish and create the strategic highway safety plan. And it's built off of reducing fatals and serious injuries in a variety of ways. Within that plan, it then identifies 9 primary emphasis areas, intersections being the number one, primarily because it accounts for almost 40% of our fatal and serious injuries. So now it's a matter of trying to figure out ways through engineering, enforcement, emergency service, and education, or what we call the 4 E's, of how we are going to try to address intersection fatals and serious injuries. Roundabouts being one of the tools in our toolbox for considering. You can see kind of the advantages from a crash severity standpoint in the 2 images on the screen, with regard to just seeing when a two-way stop or under a signal standpoint, how much of a reduction in those severe crashes occur when a roundabout is then implemented and considered further. And I'll go into further detail with some of those stats in the next few slides. We know nationally, other states are installing roundabouts at a higher rate. The state of Washington, even Michigan, Maryland, our partners in Maryland, and others, and even in other countries, are installing roundabouts at that higher rate, and are seeing the crash trends go in the correct direction. Kittleson is a well-known consultant firm nationally that produces and helps develop a lot of research, especially around roundabouts. They actually have a tool, and the link is on the screen, to see all of the roundabouts throughout the entire world. So it also includes other countries. I mentioned some of the other benefits associated with the roundabouts. Again, the speed reduction, so that calming feel. It could be used as kind of that gateway, entryway design. So there could be aesthetics that are utilized as part of it. From a operating cost standpoint, thinking about traffic signals, devices over time need to be replaced, poles, cabinets, wiring. There's maintenance associated with it that goes into it. There's a monthly utility bill that's associated with it. So the life cycle of a roundabout compared to the example of a traffic signal has a longer life cycle than due to less maintenance repairs associated with it. We also know that from a vehicular delay standpoint, as you're traveling, because there's no stops, there's no traffic signals, red, yellow, and green indication, it's the free-flowing movement of a roundabout. Vehicle delay and even sometimes vehicle and driver frustration may get reduced because there's less stoppage or less wait times, which can have environmental benefits in the long run. So continuing on the safety benefit standpoint, the biggest thing is when you look at the 2 images on the screen from a conflict point reduction standpoint, a traditional 4-legged intersection has 32 conflict points, where a roundabout is reduced down to 8. And when you start reducing those conflict points, that's where you're starting to eliminate a lot of the angle crashes or the left turning crashes that we see at traditional intersections that have higher severity of crash type, so your fatals or your serious injuries. When you start looking harder into just the fatals and the injury crashes, you start seeing percent reductions in those categories when a roundabout is considered. 90% reduction to fatal crashes, 75% to the injury crashes, about 30 to 40% related reduction in the pedestrian crashes, and 10% in the bicycle crashes. So when do you consider a roundabout? So in theory, as part of any traffic study request or evaluation standpoint, or what sometimes is considered an alternative intersection analysis, you look at what we theme as like the various categories of intersection control. The existing condition, which is typically some form of like sometimes a two-way stop, it can be an all-way stop, signal, and you're trying to look at various alternatives based on the existing condition. From a stepwise standpoint, thinking like a two-way stop, our typical is looking at all-way, signal, and then a roundabout. And a lot of those tools they have, or a lot of those intersection controls, they have similar analysis tools that are utilized and can accommodate various volumes. They will have different benefits associated with from a calming standpoint or from a crash severity standpoint. From a just comparing like an all-way stop, we are seeing statistically from a research standpoint several of the crash-related categories, angles, rear ends, serious injuries, fatals, when a two-way stop is implemented or is converted to an all-way stop, those trends get reduced. We're from a signal standpoint, we're seeing trends where total crashes, injury crashes, and your angle crashes actually rear end crashes increase. Your angle crashes with the signal condition has shown to decrease, but that roundabout application from a safety standpoint, we're seeing trends similar to what I mentioned with the all-way stops, where those conflict points, those reductions are being reduced. From a recent publication, NCHRP 1043, it was just published this month. So from a high-level planning standpoint, when you're looking at different intersection controls, they were able to produce these charts to help various decision-making or help with the decision-making process at, I'll say, like a macro level viewpoint. We're able to look at purely the volume of the roadway during the peak hours or any real hour and see what type of intersection control treatment could be viable. Probably the biggest takeaway that I say with these charts is when you look at the symbols of the different intersection controls, so all-way stop, the traffic signal, the circular roundabout indication symbol, and even the turn restriction symbols, the majority of the symbols that overtakes these charts is the roundabout. And that's where you can see from an applicability standpoint, high level, just based on looking at the major and the minor street volumes, a roundabout is likely going to be feasible at various situations. It needs to still, I caveat that with, there still needs to be a traffic analysis and an evaluation process to actually dive deeper into the intersection as a whole to understand what are the delays, what is that measurable level of service, are there other features that are needed to be provided besides a traditional roundabout, like a bypass lane condition. Those are things that will get you dive deeper into the traffic analysis. But from a planning purpose, the roundabout, for the most part, outweighs several of those other intersection control treatments that are being shown on the screen. From a where standpoint, so when you start looking at traditional intersections and the need to provide turn lanes, primarily, say, at a traffic signal, or because of and to accommodate like higher left turning vehicles, those kind of impacts you could see in blue fall a ways away from the intersection, downstream and upstream. And that essentially can be applied to any of those four approaches that are shown on the screen, where when you think about a roundabout, those impacts are primarily at the intersection. So what's indicated in red, that what so when you think of right of way impacts, those things can be less. There could be more utilities at an intersection, or there's drainage accommodations that need to be made, but it's all kind of honed in on at the intersection versus upstream and downstream from the individual location. So where and how many do we have statewide? So presently we have 30 roundabouts. The last one that was open and operational was the one in Delaware City, outside of Fort DuPont. But but we have them scattered throughout the state. This map does not include anything that is located on private property, or is not maintained by the state. So we know that there's a few roundabouts, especially in the Smyrna area, near Simon's Corner, that are within the limits of the shopping center. And there may be others, but that's just a prime example. Most of the ones that we keep track of, which are also available on our roundabout website, which I have a link at the end of the presentation. There's links, there's information associated with them, and there's a lot of other educational material on roundabouts on our website. So how do we help promote or help educate on roundabouts? So it's still considered new. So when even though the idea of a roundabout has been out there for decades, it's still a new concept in Delaware. Only having 30, where compared to other states that have hundreds, it's still something that we need to do our due diligence in educating through various opportunities like this opportunity given tonight. So during the planning and design phase, we try to do as much outreach and answer questions associated with the intersection control treatment. We do often receive the positive feedback after it's constructed, which is a good thing. But in order to help educate that, we have brochures, we do workshops and presentations like the one tonight. We have a ton of information, whether it's on our Strategic Highway Safety Plan website, our individual roundabout website. We have YouTube videos on the usage and kind of the how-to for roundabouts, whether it's biking and pedestrian usage of like what their roles are and how a driver accommodates them when they're in a roundabout. We work hand in hand with our motor vehicle and our Department of Education on education courses with the driver's manual. And then individual projects will have their own public meetings, which I have a few examples within the remaining presentation to show on how that project helps show and educate individual and residents on what is being proposed at a location. And this is a segue right into that. So from a conceptual standpoint, our West Camden Bypass project proposes to install 2 roundabouts to the west of 13. And you could see conceptually kind of how they're being located or where they're being positioned, how the geometry kind of is approaching those roundabouts or designed or proposed to connect. And this helps both from a public standpoint when we are doing the public workshops on the projects, so property owners can see kind of how their access may change, what kind of where the impacts may be along their frontage or near their property. It also helps to show kind of from a speed standpoint, because that has been a calming standpoint, how we're trying to address speeding as a whole in this area or for these examples, because we know speeding is another primary emphasis area in our Strategic Highway Safety Plan. and roundabouts is a tool that can be used to help address that. Drainage is a feature both from a construction standpoint, how you're accommodating drainage when you're building the roundabout, as well as post construction, and things are being and are open up for final operation. So there can be different treatments, whether you're accommodating it through permeable surfaces, where the runoff's going to drain to. You don't want ponding, especially if there's areas that have wider, I'll say, right shoulders, or what we call truck aprons in those areas to accommodate larger vehicles. And then I have some information about some signage and striping and some images of what we typically do based on our manuals in some previous slide or the next few slides. Lighting is is implemented at all roundabouts statewide. We have a design guidance memorandum. So when that type of treatment is installed, lighting is automatic. It's different it's different than other treatments, Always stops and signals don't require roadway lighting. So there is that added benefit with regards to implementing a roundabout. And MOT is a maintenance of traffic is a sensitive topic that has to be looked at from a constructability standpoint on how the roadway or the area is either going to be maintained and open to traffic. Are there going to be closures associated with it with various obstacles? So there's things that have to go into kind of the sequence of construction with the roundabouts. So I mentioned the speed traffic calming standpoint. So one of those things is kind of the speed profile. So knowing that roundabouts essentially driving through the roundabout is at a reduced speed of 25 miles or less. The image and the chart on the left kind of helps identify, as if you were approaching a roundabout at a higher speed, how that speed profile with that roundabout, once you get to the center, which is the 0 point of the chart, decreases during that time as you're approaching it. So as a vehicle approaches at a higher speed and they're closing the distance closer to that point 0 or the center point of the roundabout, essentially you're decreasing your speed to a certain point, which is typically 25 miles or less. This can be done based on various designs. So the image on the right for the Cedar Lane and Marlput Road design plans shows the information about like the offset left. So essentially the left turn condition is offset to where the typical as you're traveling through the intersection may be, so that it avoids that higher rate of speed through the roundabout. And that's another, again, a geometric feature that can be applied as somebody's going through the design process for the intersection control. From a signage and striping standpoint, the Delaware Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices includes information about as you're approaching whether it's a single lane or a multi-lane, how the signage, how the striping, so the traffic control devices that would exist out there, in theory should be looked at or should be pursued. It takes into account the various road users. There are other details associated with accommodating bikes, but traditionally these are what what you would typically see or you'd start with for a roundabout. In some cases, there's other devices that can be accounted for and deployed in the area on the approaches, like a radar speed sign, if need be. But that's where we adjust the various spacing or the need with the signage placement for those specific requests and situations. I will say our our partners at Federal Highway Administration is currently doing an update to the manual on uniform traffic control devices. So once those updates are provided, the department will be going through a review process. So these images that I'm showing today, there could be some minor changes in the future. There's a possibility. So just want to let you know and be aware of that. So from a construction standpoint, some of the prime things to be aware of as things are being constructed. So these are images of the Fort DuPont roundabout at Delaware City. So detours can be involved when constructing, whether it's the entire roundabout or at various legs of the roundabout. Trying to accommodate drainage, because again, weather is going to impact the construction season and the activity. So how existing drainage as well as final drainage is going to be accommodated at a specific location needs to be accommodated for through the sequence of construction process. How the paving is going to operate, whether it's with temporary pavement conditions at various times of the day or various times during construction. Grading with regards to we don't want to foresee drop-offs or experience a non-favorable situation from a vehicle or other user standpoint. Hence why in some of the pictures you see barricades, whether it's closing the shared use path, and those are detoured traffic because it may not be at the final condition or an acceptable condition. Temporary striping may be something that needs to be applied or utilized. Lighting, so in the images you can see light plants that are out there, and this is typically deployed while permanent lighting is still being constructed for the project. So Cedar Lane and Marl Pit, which was constructed a few years ago, you'd see kind of with the construction activity that goes on that usually it's working offline or off alignment with regards to as you're approaching the contractor would work to try to get that information or that construction and infrastructure in. There's still some infrastructure at the intersection that would be done, but this one, the always stop was still remained while it was being constructed, and then during various tie-ins, that's when you might see like a detour or something along those lines. SR10 and SR15 outside of Dover. The image on the left kind of gives you another scenario with regards to, from a geometric standpoint, but trying to calm the speed as they're approaching, because these are 50-mile-an-hour roadways, and that's where the like the shoulder bump out, the median bump out, or like what is called the chicane application is looked at or pursued to help try to bring those approach speeds down as you get to the center of the roundabout for that lower design speed. The image on the right includes the drone footage from the overall construction at the intersection. So in this case, the roadway was detoured, construction activity was occurring, and they were able to, again, it can accommodate or it can produce shorter construction duration times. There's other benefits from just a cleaner construction component with regards to joints and aspects associated with it. This roundabout is about 150 foot in diameter, so it is a wider, larger roundabout than some of the ones that I've previously shown. Zor Road, Speedway, and Bethesda in outside of Georgia, south of Georgetown. Again, similar from a construction, but even from a concept standpoint, you could see kind of from a conceptual standpoint where original ideas were laid out in regards to connections, and how the as primarily that Zora Road approach would come in with the intersection, and as kind of the design is being fine-tuned and pencils are being sharpened, that's where you could start getting into where then those impacts are starting to really show, which is really more confined at the overall intersection at the roundabout. From a construction standpoint, the aerial image really just shows that one leg of the location while they were being worked in this operation as they were doing it. It looks like some ditch work and some grading, and maybe some tie-in work at one of the driveways, is where they could just shut one of the legs down of a roundabout, still have the remaining inner legs open and operational, and then only one of the approaches would be under a detour and a road closure. So another new one. So Brick Mill at the emergency, the hospital, hospital in Middletown. This is what we call a compact roundabout. So at the Mifflin Road, the mini, I mentioned there was we have a concept out there on operation of a roundabout where there's no signage in the center median. This is that location. You can see that there is no signs in that gray circular center island. It's a 90-foot diameter, so it's smaller than the 150, 130s that I mentioned previously. It's double the size of Mifflin Road, but from an accommodation standpoint, larger vehicles can still make the maneuver to access any of the points of interest at the intersection. It's mainly where they would be utilizing that center island to access that approach. So if they needed to make a left turn and they needed to drive and make the accommodation, they would be able to drive over that center island, which is meant and built structurally to accommodate those larger vehicles. The approach or that center island still has it's mountable, but it still has a raised condition. It's usually about like 1 to 2 inches higher than the pavement surface. So there's still that in roadway feel or the driver feel of them going over like a bump or something in the roadway versus it all being flush. So from a summary standpoint, there's a lot of research out there. One of the most recent documents is the NCHRP 1043 guide for roundabouts, but there's several publications, whether it's from the national panels and reports, from our partners at Federal Highway, as well as our own DelDOT publications, whether through our traffic calming manual that include, but it's mainly built around like subdivision roadways, but still it provides information on some of the smaller roundabout features, as well as our design guidance memorandum, which currently is under review. Our primary review is focusing on how some of the national research has provided information on some of the geometrics, as well as getting kind of that alternative intersection operation in the forefront of the analysis or the guidance, so that certain elements can be captured to understand, well, what is the percentage of trucks on this roadway, both now and potentially in the future, and how can that data help assess like the size or the impacts of a roundabout treatment. From a I guess other useful websites that are out there. I mentioned the Kittleson Roundabout website that has over 7,000 locations throughout the world. FHWA, it is identified as a proven safety countermeasure, so they've recognized it as a tool that's used to show and to produce safety benefits at intersections throughout the country. I mentioned DelDOT's roundabout website that we're routinely updating with various information, education, tools, as well as where individuals can see where roundabouts are located, as well as how it ties into our safety efforts with our strategic highway safety plan. Safety is the department's number one thing, and knowing that roundabouts has a significant reduction to address fatals and serious injuries, it's a tool that we want to continue to pursue and implement statewide. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and if there's any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Haag. If you could take down your presentation, I can then see the council. Before I go into questions, I just want to make sure that everybody understands who I have present. I've gotten a couple email or texts from people wondering if they were marked present because council could not hear it. So the only ones that I have as not being present are Mr. Smiley, Mr. Hollins, Mr. Bell, and Mr. Cartier. Everyone else is marked present for this meeting. At this point, Mr. Haag, I would love to say thank you. I am a big proponent of roundabouts. I'm from originally and go back several times to some of those states that you mentioned that are very progressive in roundabouts. And I've seen some beautiful areas where there may have been a 3 or 4 mile stretch connecting two major highways, and they've now built developments along those areas, and at the entrance to every development, there is a roundabout. So when I go back to my state days of working with the General Assembly and knowing how many calls we got on traffic calming, and really the only options were bulb outs and speed bumps. So I think that this is a great way of looking at not stopping traffic, but being able to move them along in a safe way within especially residential areas. So after saying that, is there, Miss Durham, would you like to make any comments since it was your presentation?
Well, again, I just want to thank Peter for being with us today. It was awesome. You really covered it from soup to nuts. And I guess just to emphasize one of the points you alluded to, my understanding of statistics is often DOTs will poll communities in advance of proposing a roundabout at a particular location, and the average is about 80% of the people will say they don't want it, they don't like it, they're afraid of it, whatever. They don't like the idea. But after they're built and they let them run for a while and people get used to it and they poll again, it flips completely the other way, and 80% of the people love it. So I just hope that we can use them more. The whole reason why Bike Delaware emphasized them at last year's conference was their current theme is everyone gets home safely, in other words, and we reduce the amount of fatalities. And roundabouts have huge number of benefits, but the safety and reduction in crashes is certainly the most important. So thanks, Peter, for being here.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Mr. Carter.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I'm down here in southern Newcastle County, where I think we've adapted pretty well to them. They're working really, really well. The one question I do have is I spend a lot of time working with my local legislators trying to do traffic calming within communities where they're taking their what used to be suburban street monies, whatever it is now, and they seem to always be talking about speed bumps or signs or stop signs, none of which really work. And I'm just wondering if you guys have given any thought to a really small design, that we could put almost, sometimes I think a big concrete flower pot with directions around it in some of these communities as a traffic calming in existing communities. And I don't know what their expense is, if there's been any effort to try some truly mini type of traffic circles for traffic calming in existing communities, if you have any ideas at all, if you've tried or seen anything like that.
Mr. Haag, you may respond, but please state your name each time you respond so that we have it on the record.
Sure. So Peter Haag, that's a great point. So a smaller or a mini type roundabout is in our traffic calming manual as a potential idea that can be pursued. It's probably one of the highest financial commitments compared to other treatments. And sometimes, and we've had a few that have ranged as high as $100,000 to $150,000 when you start thinking about implementing around a mini compact scenario in some of these communities. When you compare it to stop signs that are a few $100s, and then the radar speed sign, which is now a few $1,000s, and then the speed hump that is several $1,000s. So it's trying to kind of weigh all of those scenarios to see what is kind of the best treatment. And also too is I do look at it as kind of like there is that stepwise process where trying to get to that point of the high dollar intersection control scenario when we might be able to address something in a lower cost, more effective, immediate type of condition, but it's something that we don't automatically rule out. It's just through the public process and the community process of working through the alternatives, and around a mini roundabout is a part of it. Sometimes we've engaged communities on what are called pop-ups, so that the planner idea scenario, there are applications that can be done where we put something out there real temporary, see how traffic responds to it, and now can we come up with a permanent solution based off of what was piloted.
Yeah. Can I follow up on that one, please?
Yes.
I'm wondering if maybe I don't need to talk with DelDOT a little bit more. The one area where I'd love to see us be a little bit more aggressive is when I have new communities coming in, they're interconnecting to existing communities, and I look at the linear distances. I know the traffic is going to be moving faster. It's a valid complaint from some of those communities, but I just wonder if it is something that we could just make it part of the development plan to calm the traffic, get it done at that time, and make it a little bit easier to make these interconnections in a way that gives us a much stronger safeguard that it's not going to add to some really high speed and need for traffic calming later. And that's something I think I'll follow up with later, but it's something that I'm starting to look more and more at. And I don't know if you get involved at all with your DelDOT guys that review the TISs and the plans, but just mention if there's a consideration anytime we're looking at these interconnections when the communities are worried about whether it's going to increase traffic speeds. A lot of those cases it will, but I think adding some traffic circles as we interconnect these might be part of the solution, a big part of the solution.
President Hartley-Nagel, I see your hand up, I believe.
I wanted to ask about did we do any studies on the traffic circles in Delaware? Do our constituents, what did they think of them? I know I lived on Mifflin Road for 4 years, and the neighbors were not happy with the traffic circle. It did not slow things down, except for that one spot, which really, there wasn't houses there. It was some, I think it affected one house it was in front of. So I want to know when we're going to do them. They are expensive. How do we decide that we're going to put one there? Who is it impacting? And do the constituents there want them?
Mr. Haag.
Peter Haag. So there is an evaluation process. So as part of any request or intersection evaluation component, we are running through traffic analysis to then see what is the existing condition, what is the crash data associated with things today, what are some of the speeding what's occurring from a speeding standpoint and a driver usage of that corridor. And then a lot of times we are pulling similar information after implementation. So a lot of our roundabouts, we produce an annual monitoring effort purely based on crash statistics that evaluates each and every year since the roundabout has opened, how crash trends have changed over time, or that follow-up year, so that we can then see, okay, what kind of statistical information is being shown at these new intersection controls statewide. And if there is something that kind of pops up or is identified as something that we need to look harder into, we do. And then that's when we start looking at different alternatives. When an alternative is identified, especially through our calming program, that's where we work hand in hand, whether it's with the homeowners association or the civic association, on different alternatives, whether it's large. Some may generate, especially our capital projects, they generate the need to actually do physical public workshops within, whether it's communities, impacted residents, you name it, can attend to voice whether their concerns, ask questions, you name it, with regards to what's going on. If there's right-of-way impacts for a specific location for a project, our right-of-way section will then reach out and work with the individual property owner to answer any questions and go through their right-of-way process on whether it's whether there's purchasing needed, whether there's easements that are needed, things of that nature. So we're always trying to engage the public throughout our public process on various treatments, especially roundabouts. But I'll say more so from the education side, because it is so, I'll say, new. We want to be able to educate some of the I'll say the myths or some of those questions that we've always routinely heard on their usage and their applicability, whether it's from other states, because individuals that have come to Delaware and they hear and they see what other states are doing, and we kind of promote what statistically we're seeing statewide as well as nationally.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Mr. Carter.
I just wanted to add that I think that question of whether people like them or not is once they use them and see how they work. In southern Newcastle County 10 years ago, I think people were really hesitant. Now they love them. I actually have, I've been to a lot of these public workshops where people are much happier down here now with the thought of a roundabout. I know I have a lot of them now complaining because DelDOT's considering an interim light where they're going to do some improvements at St. Anne's Church Road and 71, and they want to go straight to a roundabout. I'm getting the same complaints on Oxentown Road at St. Andrew's School where there's nothing planned there, but they'd like to have a roundabout. And I think that comes with time. Initially, people are uncomfortable. It takes people a little bit of time of driving to learn that you yield, you don't stop, and you keep. And once you start doing that, it moves much better. So I think it's an evolving process that I don't care where you do them. I think you will find within short period of time, people are far more happy with these than they are with stoplights and four-way stop signs. And that's just a natural progression and learning experience. And wherever we can get them down here, we're going to do everything we can to work with DelDOT to get them in, even the ones that we're retrofitting, just because they work so much more efficiently.
Any other questions from council members? Seeing none, do we have any public comment?
Councilwoman, there's no public comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haag. We certainly appreciate the time that you've taken to come and present that to us. As you can see, there is interest. I think probably one of the easier ways to get roundabouts is if they are planned within a new development plan, so we're not trying to retrofit things in. But that obviously is up to the developers, the planners, DelDOT to figure that out. So we certainly do. I know Ms. Durham appreciates you coming. So thank you very much.